This is HOA Neighbor Court, and the timeline is absurd. I need you to acknowledge the notice. Heather Caldwell shoved the complaint printout at me and screamed that multiple complaints meant automatic guilt. I stared at the paper, then at her face, then back at the paper. The header said Granite Falls Property Owners Association, Columbus, Ohio. The body text was a mess of accusations about a missing winter coat package that had been donated for charity. She claimed I was the last person near the donation table at the clubhouse. She claimed the package showed up at my porch later, and I hid it. She claimed multiple neighbors filed complaints. I looked up and tried to speak, but she cut me off. "You stole from the community," she said. "You are banned from the pool, the gym, and the clubhouse until you pay the investigation fee and return the package." I felt my stomach drop. I work as a software QA analyst, so I test systems all day and I know when something does not add up. I looked at the complaint form again. The date was 2 days ago. The package disappeared 3 days ago. The timeline made no sense. I asked for a copy of the rules she was citing and a breakdown of the investigation fee. She pulled out her portable thermal printer, loaded a rule, and printed a fresh notice on the spot. Then she pointed at me and said, "I can fine you daily until you give up." I stepped back and raised my hands. "I did not take anything," I said. "I was not even at the clubhouse that day. I was working from home. I have call logs, meeting timestamps, everything." She smiled and said the board already voted. "You confessed when you asked for the rule," she said. "Asking means you know you are guilty." I felt my face flush. "That makes no sense," I said. She ignored me and walked away, rolling her stamp pad in one hand and jingles her huge keyring in the other like it was a badge of authority. I stood there in the management office lobby for a minute, trying to process what just happened. The receptionist behind the desk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Linda, gave me a sympathetic look but said nothing. I walked out into the parking lot and checked my phone. I had 3 missed calls from my neighbor 2 doors down. I called back. He picked up immediately and told me Heather was going door to door telling people I confessed to stealing the coat package and that I was banned from amenities until I returned it and paid a fine. I felt a knot form in my chest. I told him I did not confess to anything and I did not steal anything. He believed me, but he said other neighbors were already talking. Heather was planting the story fast. I went home and pulled up my doorbell camera footage. I scrolled back 3 days. I was home the entire afternoon the package went missing. The camera showed me taking out the trash at 2 in the afternoon, then nothing until 6 when I went out to grab takeout. I was never near the clubhouse. I saved the footage to my phone and backed it up to 3 different cloud accounts. Then I checked the donation table timeline. The clubhouse has a shared calendar portal that logs every reservation and access swipe. I logged in and pulled the access report. The donation table was set up for a charity drive from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon that day. I was never there. I looked at the access log more carefully. Heather swiped in at 3:45. She was the last person in the log before the package was reported missing. I took a screenshot and saved it. Then I opened a new document and started building a timeline with timestamps for every piece of evidence. That night, I got an email from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation. The subject line said "Final Notice. Investigation fee due." I opened it and read the body. The fee was $250. If I did not pay within 48 hours, they would add a $50 daily late fee and suspend my amenity access indefinitely. The email also said the board reserved the right to place a lien on my property if I refused to comply. I printed the email and added it to my evidence binder. Then I replied and asked for a copy of the investigation report, the rule citation, and the names of the neighbors who filed complaints. I got an auto reply saying my message was received and I would hear back within 5 business days. My deadline was 2 days. The math did not work. I could not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Heather standing in the management lobby slamming that portable rolling stamp pad on a clipboard like a judge passing sentence. I saw her jingling that keyring like it gave her authority over my life. I got up at 2 in the morning and went back to the doorbell footage. I scrubbed through every hour. At 3:50 on the day the package disappeared, a figure walked past my house, carrying a large shopping bag with a charity logo. I zoomed in. It was Heather. The bag was bulky, and the bottom corner had a torn mailer hanging out. I saved the clip and added it to the timeline. Then I set an alarm for 7 and tried to sleep. The next morning, I called the management office and asked to speak to someone about the investigation. Linda answered. She told me Heather was handling the case personally and I needed to speak to her directly. I said I had evidence that proved I was not involved and I needed to file a formal rebuttal. Linda sighed and said she would pass the message along, but Heather had already told the office I was uncooperative and likely to retaliate. I felt my hands shake. Retaliate? I said. I have not done anything. Linda lowered her voice and said Heather had been escalating complaints for months and the office was tired of it, but they could not override the board without a formal hearing. She told me to keep my evidence organized and be ready to present it if I got a hearing date. Then, she hung up. I went to the clubhouse that afternoon to check the donation table area myself. The door was locked. I swiped my access card. The reader beeped red and flashed a message. Access denied. Contact management. I pulled out my phone and called the office again. Linda picked up. She told me Heather had flagged my account that morning and suspended my access pending resolution of the theft investigation. I asked if that was legal. Linda said it was within the board treasurer authority under the bylaws if there was an active investigation. I asked how long the suspension would last. She said until Heather cleared it, or until the board voted to overturn it. I thanked her and hung up. Then I walked around the building and looked through the clubhouse windows. The donation table was still set up, but it was empty now. I took photos of the table, the room layout, and the access reader at the door. That evening, I was checking my mail at the cluster box when Heather pulled up in her car. She got out holding her clipboard and her thermal printer. She walked straight to me and said the board decided to add the daily fine starting today because I had not responded to the violation notice. I held up my phone and showed her the doorbell clip of her walking past my house with the shopping bag. I said, "This is you carrying the package 3 days ago at 3:50. You were the last person to access the clubhouse." She glanced at the screen, then looked me in the eye and said that footage proved nothing. She said I doctored it, and she had witnesses who saw me near the donation table that morning. I asked for their names. She refused. Then she printed a new notice on the spot, handed it to me, and said the fine was now $300. If I kept harassing her, she would call the police. I asked how showing evidence was harassment. She walked back to her car and drove off. I went home and updated my timeline. Then I called a lawyer friend from college. He listened to the whole story and told me the HOA could fine me under the bylaws, but they had to follow due process. If they skipped a hearing or failed to provide evidence, I could challenge the fines in small claims court. He also said if Heather was lying about witnesses, that could be defamation, but it was hard to prove unless I had recordings. He suggested I document every interaction, keep all communications in writing, and file a formal complaint with the management company. I thanked him and got to work. I drafted a formal rebuttal letter with timestamps, screenshots, and video clips. I attached the access log showing Heather was the last person in the clubhouse, the doorbell clip showing her with the package, and my own alibi proof showing I was home all afternoon. I emailed it to the management office, copied the HOA board, and kept a PDF backup. 2 days later, I got a reply. It was not from Linda, it was from Heather. She said my rebuttal was rejected because I failed to provide original documentation, and my video evidence was inadmissible without third-party verification. She also said the board scheduled a lien filing for next week if I did not pay the now $450 balance. I printed the email and added it to my binder. Then I checked the Access log portal again. The log from 3 days ago was gone. The entire afternoon was missing. I took a screenshot of the gap and added it to my evidence. Then I called Linda. She picked up and I told her the Access log was edited. She said she noticed that too, but she could not prove who did it. She told me the portal kept an audit trail and I should request it in writing. I asked if she could pull it for me. She said no, but she could tell me the request process. I wrote down the steps and thanked her. Then I filed a formal records request with the management company. The next morning, I went to the management office in person to pick up the audit log. Linda handed me a printed report with a thick stack of pages. She said the log showed every portal access, every edit, and every deletion for the past 30 days. She also said Heather tried to block the request, but corporate overruled her because records requests were protected under state law. I thanked Linda and sat down in the lobby to read the report. The log showed Heather accessed the portal at 9 that morning, 3 days after the package disappeared. She deleted the access records for the afternoon of the theft. The audit trail tagged her user account and timestamped the deletion. I took photos of every page. Then I looked up and saw Heather walking into the lobby. She saw me with the report, and her face went pale. Then it turned red. She marched over and demanded to know why I was harassing the staff. I held up the report and said, "This shows you deleted the access log." She said the log was corrupted and she was cleaning up bad data. I asked why the only deleted records were from the day the package went missing. She did not answer. Instead, she turned to Linda and said she wanted me trespassed from the management office for creating a hostile environment. Linda looked at her and said, "I am not doing that." Heather glared at her, then turned back to me and said the board would hear about this. She walked out. I stayed in the lobby for another hour and made copies of the entire audit log. Then I called my lawyer friend again. He told me the deleted log was strong evidence of tampering and I should file a police report. I asked if that would escalate things. He said yes, but it would also create an official record and force the HOA to take the accusation seriously. I thanked him and drove to the police station. I filed a report and gave the officer copies of the audit log, the doorbell footage, and the email thread. The officer listened and took notes. He said the case was not criminal unless I could prove Heather stole the package and sold it or destroyed it, but he would write up the report and give me an incident number. He also said if Heather kept harassing me, I could file for a protection order. I took the incident number and left. That night, my neighbor 2 doors down called me. He said Heather came by his house and told him I filed a false police report, and the board was preparing to sue me for defamation. He asked if that was true. I told him the report was real, and I had proof Heather deleted evidence and lied about witnesses. He said he believed me, but he was worried because Heather was going around the neighborhood telling people I was dangerous and unstable. He also said another neighbor, an older woman named Margaret, saw Heather carrying the package into her car that afternoon and was willing to talk. I asked if Margaret would give a statement. He said she was scared because Heather had threatened to fine her in the past for a fence dispute. I told him I needed her testimony to clear my name. He said he would ask, but Margaret was leaving town tomorrow night for 3 weeks, and if I wanted to talk to her, I had to do it fast. I grabbed my keys and drove to Margaret's house. Margaret answered the door and let me in. She looked nervous. I sat down in her living room and explained everything. I showed her the audit log, the doorbell footage, and the timeline. She listened and nodded. Then she said she saw Heather load the package into her trunk at 3:55 that afternoon. She said she was walking her dog and saw Heather parked near the clubhouse. The trunk was open, and Heather was holding a large shopping bag with a torn mailer sticking out. Margaret said she thought it was strange, but she did not say anything because Heather had accused her of violating the fence height rule last year and fined her $600. She was terrified of retaliation. I asked if she would write a statement or talk to the police. She said no, she could not risk it. I told her I understood, but without her testimony, Heather would keep lying, and I would keep getting fined. Margaret looked at me for a long time. Then, she said she would write a short statement, but she would not go on camera, and she would not testify in person. I said that was enough. She wrote 3 sentences on a notepad, signed it, and dated it. I took a photo and thanked her. Then I left. The next day, I went back to the management office and asked Linda if I could schedule a meeting with the board. She said the next board meeting was in 2 weeks, but Heather had already told the board I was uncooperative and the case was closed. I asked if I could appeal. She said I could file a written appeal, but it had to go through Heather first because she was the treasurer and handled all violation cases. I asked if there was any way to bypass her. Linda lowered her voice and said I could escalate to corporate, but it would take weeks and they rarely overturned board decisions. She also said Heather had already sent the lien paperwork to corporate and it was under review. I felt my chest tighten. I asked how much time I had. Linda said the lien could be filed as soon as next week, if corporate approved it. I thanked her and walked out. I spent the rest of the day organizing my evidence. I had the audit log showing Heather deleted the access records. I had the doorbell footage showing her with the package. I had Margaret's written statement. I had the email thread showing Heather moving the goalposts. I had the incident number from the police report. I printed everything and put it in a binder with tabs. Then I made 3 copies and mailed one to the management company, one to the HOA board president, and one to my lawyer friend. I kept the original and waited. The next afternoon, I tried to use the pool. I wanted to clear my head and I figured the suspension might have been lifted after I filed the appeal. I walked to the gate and swiped my card. The reader beeped red again. I looked through the fence and saw Heather inside talking to the lifeguard. She saw me and walked over. She stood on the other side of the gate and smiled. "You are still banned," she said. I held up my phone and showed her the email I sent to the board with all the evidence. I said I proved you lied and deleted evidence. She laughed and said the board did not care about my conspiracy theories. Then she pulled out her keyring and held it up, jingling it like a taunt. She said, "I am speaking for the community, and the community does not want thieves here." The lifeguard looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. I asked Heather if she felt good lying to people. She said she never lied, and I was the one making things up. Then she walked away. I went home and called my lawyer friend again. He said I had enough evidence to file in small claims court, but he recommended I try one more escalation with corporate first. He said if corporate ignored me, the court filing would look stronger. I agreed and drafted an email to the management company corporate office. I attached every piece of evidence and requested an immediate investigation into Heather's conduct. I sent it and waited. 3 days later, I got a call from a corporate investigator. She said she reviewed my email and the evidence and she had serious concerns about the case. She asked if I was willing to come to the corporate office for an interview. I said yes. She scheduled it for the next morning. I showed up with my evidence binder and sat down in a conference room with the investigator and her assistant. She asked me to walk through the timeline. I did. I showed her the audit log, the doorbell footage, Margaret's statement, the email thread, and the incident number. She took notes and asked clarifying questions. Then she said she would review the case with the legal team and get back to me within a week. I thanked her and left. That afternoon, I got a call from Linda at the management office. She said Heather just came in and demanded to know why corporate was investigating her. Linda said Heather was furious and threatened to sue the management company for defamation. Linda also said Heather told her the board was going to fire the management company and hire a new one that would not question her authority. I asked Linda if she thought that would happen. She said no, because the board president was already unhappy with Heather and this might be the push he needed to remove her. I asked if she could tell me more. She said she could not, but she suggested I keep pushing and not back down. I thanked her and hung up. 2 days later, the investigator called me back. She said corporate reviewed the evidence and concluded that Heather violated multiple policies, including tampering with records, making false accusations, and abusing her board authority. She said corporate was recommending the board remove Heather from her position and issue a formal apology to me. She also said the lien paperwork was being pulled and all fines were being waived. I asked what would happen to Heather. She said that was up to the board, but corporate would no longer work with her in any official capacity. I thanked her and felt a wave of relief. Then I asked if I could get the decision in writing. She said yes, and she would email me a summary by the end of the day. I hung up and sat down on my couch. My hands were shaking. I had been fighting this for 2 weeks, and I finally had proof that I was right. That night, Heather showed up at my door. She did not knock. She stood on my porch and yelled through the door. She said I ruined her reputation, and she was going to make sure I regretted it. I did not open the door. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. She kept yelling. She said the board was full of cowards and corporate had no authority to override her decisions. She said she was going to file a lawsuit against me and the management company for defamation and harassment. She said I was a liar and a thief, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. I stayed quiet and kept recording. After a few minutes, she left. I saved the recording and added it to my evidence binder. The next morning, I forwarded the recording to the investigator and the board president. I also filed a second police report for harassment and trespassing. The officer who took the report said he remembered my first report and he would follow up with Heather. He also said if she came back, I should call immediately. I thanked him and went home. That afternoon, the board president called me. He introduced himself and apologized for everything I went through. He said the board was holding an emergency meeting that night to discuss Heather's conduct, and he wanted me to know they were taking it seriously. He also said he reviewed my evidence, and he was appalled by what Heather did. He asked if I wanted to attend the meeting. I said yes. He gave me the time and location and hung up. I showed up at the meeting with my evidence binder. The board president, 2 other board members, and Linda from the management office were there. Heather was not. The board president opened the meeting and asked me to present my case. I walked through the timeline again, showed the evidence, and played the recording from the night before. The board members looked uncomfortable. One of them, a younger man in his 30s, said he had heard rumors about Heather abusing her authority, but he never saw proof until now. The other board member, an older woman, said Heather had been a problem for years, but no one wanted to challenge her because she was good at fundraising and event planning. The board president said that was no longer an excuse, and the board needed to act. He proposed removing Heather from the treasurer role and banning her from holding any board position for 5 years. The other 2 members voted yes. The motion passed. The board president said he would notify Heather in writing and update the community. He also said the HOA would issue a formal apology to me and clear my record. I thanked them and left. The next day, I got an email from the HOA. The subject line said formal apology and case resolution. The email said the board investigated the theft accusation and determined it was unfounded. The email said all fines and penalties were waived and my amenity access was restored. The email also said the board removed Heather Caldwell from the treasurer role due to policy violations, and she would no longer represent the HOA in any official capacity. The email ended with an apology and a promise to review enforcement procedures to prevent future abuses. I printed the email and added it to my binder. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer friend Margaret and my neighbor 2 doors down. My neighbor called me an hour later and said he saw Heather packing her car. He asked if she was moving. I said I did not know, but I hoped so. A few days later, I went to the clubhouse to test my access. I swiped my card at the door. The reader beeped green and the lock clicked open. I walked inside and looked around. The donation table was gone. The room was set up for a community event. I walked to the back office and saw Linda sitting at a desk. She looked up and smiled. She said she was glad the case was resolved and she was sorry I had to go through all that. I thanked her for helping me and told her I could not have done it without her quiet support. She said she was just doing her job, but she was relieved Heather was gone. She also said the board hired a new treasurer and the new person was much more reasonable. I said that was good to hear. Then I left. That weekend, I ran into Margaret at the mailbox cluster. She said she heard what happened and she was proud of me for standing up to Heather. She also said Heather tried to call her and threaten her for giving a statement, but Margaret hung up and blocked her number. I asked if she was okay. She said yes, and she felt safer now that Heather was off the board. I thanked her again for the statement and told her it made all the difference. She smiled and said she wished she had spoken up sooner. I told her it was never too late. A few weeks later, I got a package delivery. It was a replacement winter coat donation package from the charity organization. There was a note attached that said the original package was recovered and returned to the charity by the HOA board. The note said the charity appreciated my patience and they hoped I would continue supporting their work. I smiled and put the coat in my closet. Then I checked my HOA account online. The balance was 0. The violation history was cleared, the amenity access was restored. Everything was back to normal. But I was not done. I wanted to make sure Heather could never do this to anyone else. I contacted the charity organization and asked if they wanted to file a complaint against Heather for stealing the package. They said they appreciated the offer, but they did not have the resources to pursue it. I understood. Then I contacted the local news. I sent them a summary of the case and copies of the evidence. A reporter called me back 2 days later and said they were interested in the story. She asked if I would be willing to go on camera. I said yes. She scheduled an interview for the following week. The interview aired on the local evening news. I sat down with the reporter and walked through the timeline. I showed the audit log, the doorbell footage, and the email thread. The reporter asked how I felt when Heather accused me. I said I felt violated and scared because I did not know how to fight back against someone who had the power to find me and ruin my reputation. The reporter asked what I wanted people to know. I said I wanted people to know that HOA board members are not above the rules, and if you are being abused, you have options. The story ended with a clip of Heather walking to her car and refusing to comment. The reporter said Heather declined an interview, and the HOA board declined to comment beyond their written apology. The story went viral locally. I got messages from neighbors thanking me for speaking out. I got messages from people in other HOAs saying they were dealing with similar abuse, and my story gave them hope. I also got a message from the management company thanking me for the publicity and saying they were implementing new oversight procedures to prevent board abuse. I felt good. I felt like I did something that mattered. A few months later, I saw Heather at the grocery store. She was in the checkout line ahead of me. She did not see me at first. Then she turned, and we made eye contact. She looked away quickly and left without her receipt. I did not say anything. I just smiled and paid for my groceries. The HOA held elections that fall. The board president ran for re-election and won. The new treasurer ran unopposed and won. I ran for a board seat and won. I wanted to make sure the enforcement procedures were fair and transparent. I wanted to make sure no one else went through what I went through. At my first board meeting, I proposed a new policy requiring all violation cases to include a formal hearing with evidence review before any fines or penalties were issued. The board voted yes. The policy passed. I felt like I had come full circle. That winter, the charity organization held a donation drive at the clubhouse. I volunteered to help set up the donation table. Linda stopped by and thanked me again for everything I did. She said the neighborhood felt different now, calmer and more respectful. I agreed. I looked around the room and saw neighbors talking and laughing. I saw the new treasurer checking donation receipts with a smile. I saw the board president greeting people at the door. It felt like a community again. It felt like home. And I knew I had earned it. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.